had no idea about how I was going to get to Liberia, other than God said I'm the how, which he told me when he called me to preach the gospel in the other countries. And so we were at Brother Clendenin at the School of, well, actually, it wasn't the School of Christ, it was, but he had his camp meeting. We were there, and that's when all those preachers come together. People come from all over. And at one, after that morning session, everybody wanted to go out to eat. Long story short, we decided to go to the Golden Corral. When I walked in the Golden Corral, God began to preach to some youth there, and a little girl got saved. And then from right in the Golden Corral, then we moved from there and went to sit down where all the food was at, where all the other people had gathered together to eat. And I set my plate down, and there was several people, I'd say about 10 or 12 people, sitting at another table. They were black people, and I just set my plate down and turned to them and began to preach. I just began to preach the gospel.
Right in the restaurant.
Right in the restaurant. I mean, no sooner set the plate down, I began to preach. And when I did, I only preached a few words, and the power of God hit these women. They come out of their seat dancing in the Spirit of God. I mean, God hit that place. Revival broke out that quick. Some elderly woman come running across the place. I want part of that. I want in on that. Power of God was moving. Everybody in Golden Corral looking around what was going on. Well, God moved. And so there was a reason behind that. It wasn't just to get the attention. It was God was making a statement. And so when everything settled down, and mind you, this was been several, maybe a few months after I had the dream about Liberia. I have no access to Liberia. I don't know anybody in Liberia. And so I'm at this table. We finally settled down. We began to talk about things. I told the people I was a missionary preaching. Long story short, a woman said to me, well, have you ever been to Liberia? She brought it up. I said, no, I haven't. But see, I knew that was a connecting. And that became the door of entrance to this couple called Brother and Sister Bedell. They're from the States, I think from Louisiana or somewhere, and they had a church going on in Liberia, and they asked me to go with them and preach in Liberia. And that was the entrance right there.
Okay.
Because when I got to Liberia, I didn't really know Pastor and Sister Bedell. They're from the States, and they had a church over there. So we were actually there to help them in their church. Meanwhile, they introduced us to this Sister Smith, of which God linked that. It was just how God brought it. They were the entrance to get us to Liberia. After that, God began to move. And Sister Smith, she was a devout Muslim. She began to tell me her testimony. And all that, see how God worked it. He has to find someone, a vessel by which he can move in. And she was one of them. And so we did our part. We got there, and Sister Smith was telling me that she was a devout Muslim. When the times were going good, she owned 4 nightclubs. She was very prosperous. And she'd heard about Christ, but she didn't want anything to do with it. Her family was so caught up in the Muslim faith and so very strong in it. But then she developed it right before, I don't know when it was, with the war, during the war. I don't know what happened there, but she come down very sick. I don't know if she had a growth in her body or something. She went down to nothing. And she was actually at the point of death. And she told me that she was dying, and so her husband decided to go uptown and to prepare for her death, get her casket or whatever. Meanwhile, while he was going there, she said Jesus appeared to her and came to her. And he said, I'm going to heal you. He said, and make you whole, basically, for one reason. I want you to go back and tell your people. Other words, he was bringing her into salvation, to be a tool or an instrument. And so she said when her husband came back, she was standing up, combing her hair. God had totally made her whole. Jesus had touched her, made her whole. And she denied the Muslim faith, preached Christ, told her that her people denied her people rejected her. Her family didn't want nothing to do with her because they were all devout Muslims. Wow. She sold all of her nightclubs. She turned one of them into a church, of which Brother Alfonso, that's where I met him, and I preached in her church. The amazing thing was God had used her in such a way that she had developed a relationship with the government, where she became the administrator over the religious affairs of Liberia. So when God brought up that connection, he put us with her, which gave us the access throughout the whole country, because they had many checkpoints that you had to have certain documentation to get through and so on. But when we were with her, all she did was flash her card. God opened us from the northeast, southwest. We could go anywhere in that country, and she took us through there. And so that's how we ended up. She said, I want to show you my people. She had a burden for those refugee camps. And when me and Brother Patterson had went there, she took us to them refugee camps, and when we looked at those refugee camps, there were utterly thousands of people. Far as your eye can see, they had little UN tried to set up some tents for them and help them. Many of them were starving. Many of them have no food. It was a horrifying sight. Brother Alfonso was telling me that where one place we went, there's probably 50,000 in one refugee camp. There may have been 10 or 20 here, and then 100 and some thousand in another refugee camp. People who were scattered from the main cities and towns where they used to establish their home. We preached a little on scaffolding and preaching to those people. When she showed us that, it was at that time that we told Sister Smith we would be back. She asked us to come back. That was our first entrance, and so Brother Patterson and I told her we would come back, and we felt we needed to be back within 30 days, very close. So we came back to the States. God delivered several thousands of dollars just in His hands and mine. We went back and negotiated with the Lebanese people. 1 month later, we were back in Liberia. We negotiated with the Lebanese people who had bought a lot of the properties of the Liberian people, who were basically using the system to work them to get everything out of them. And here's the like Israel. The enemy owns their properties now, and so they're selling their, it was amazing. Long story short, we negotiated with the Lebanese people there. We had bought almost 60,000 pounds of rice, which was almost like a semi-truckload, many bundles of clothes, and we went out into those refugee camps, and physically Sister Smith working with us and others, in which his wife Elizabeth was one of the main workers too. That's how I come to know him. Sister Elizabeth was a right-hand person who would cook the food. She was such a hard laboring worker. It's phenomenal to see a woman that was that diligent. Very. So anyway, what happened was we went and we made the feedings. We ministered food. We preached the gospel. We saw many people come to Christ. But here's the thing. It was as if God brought those people out of their territories or their comfort zones and brought them all out in the midst of the fields. And there they all was sitting. But everything they had, one of the greatest poverties I ever saw, was a people who have once had everything, and now it's taken away. It's not like the poverty you see in deep bush of Africa, which we've been before, where men have never tasted Jell-O or never tasted butter or never had real nice fine homes. These people had fine homes. They had fine food. They had everything that we in America had for the most part, and that was all taken away. And like Israel, when Israel was taken into Babylon captivity, there they hung their harps on the willow tree. There their hearts remembered their feast day and the eating of those great pomegranates and all the great fruits. They yearned. Their minds were taunted because their taste buds had once tasted and now they can't get it. That's some of the greatest poverty you'll ever see. And I saw that in the Liberian people who stood in those refugee camps, literally starving, having hardly no food. But now God had brought them to a place to hear His message one more time. And that was an amazing thing to me. And we had preached the gospel to literally thousands of people. And I remember the Lord telling the people, I brought you here. I've got your attention. I brought you to hear my word, to turn their hearts back. And I remember we preached, I don't know how many, several days we were out in those camps preaching, from pastors to everyone. And then when we ended up going back home and coming back, little by little, even to this day, there's not hardly anybody there anymore. Little by little, they would begin to go back and return. Little by little.
Okay.
And now, even so much that some of the bulldozers came out and bulldozed some of those little huts, little pieces of nothing they were staying in. And God had captured their minds and allowed them to go back now. But at that moment, God got their attention to hear His word. And that is the mercy of God. And let me say this. During the time I was there, and I remember Liberia was called the Little America, I remember I was down praying, crying out to God, because I never saw such things. You know, preaching to groups of people. When the war was going on, brother against brother, men would maybe kill their own cousins. They were forced to do things they didn't normally would do. Now the war is settled, and you're out in these camps and you're preaching, forgive if you want to be forgiven. Well, this man over here killed this man's wife, and so on and so on. So that's the atmosphere you're preaching in. All the war's over. Everybody's together now, and now you must preach forgiveness. It's one thing to forgive a man for stealing your cat or stealing your cattle. But you're talking about forgiving a man who raped your wife and killed your son and brutally killed your cousin or uncle. There's a whole other realm of forgiveness here. And I saw by the Spirit of God move in those camps, because it was God's visitation. When God's in it, then you're on holy ground. I watched men, through the power of the gospel, come and hug each other and say, I'm sorry for what I did. Please forgive me. And I hear another man say, I forgive you. God has come into that place. That's the power of the gospel. It's not by might or by power, but by God's Spirit. And we saw that happen, and then praying and crying out to God, the Lord let me know down one night praying. I said, Lord, they call this Little America. And I marvel at the devastation. I marvel with what's happening. And as if God said to me, this can happen also to big America. And now we sit here tonight with a brother that's come from another country. And could it be God's trying to tell us, I'm no respecter of person. Right. I blessed Abraham, I'll bless you. I burn up Sodom and Gomorrah, I can burn you up too. God is reaching out with his mercy and sending warnings. We have many Bible examples of it. And yet we have a living illustration here in our time. This is in our modern day and age. This thing just ended in 2003. Right. Can we not see that there's something going on here in America and we need to take heed to it? So. Right.